So welcome everybody to this launch of Solidaridad Palm Oil Barometer 2. I'm very happy you're all here. I'm thankful for the panelists to be here and the speakers and sure enough, the audience. Yeah, as an agenda, can we go to the next slide? Marcia, can you? Yeah, thank you. So first I will welcome you, that's now. Then we'll spend about 30 minutes doing presentations. My colleague Law from Malaysia will tell about the business case for smallholders in Malaysia. Mark Wong will tell us about how SD Guthrie handles smallholder inclusivity. And then my colleague Michel Riemersma will tell about the recommendations on procurement for prosperity that are in our Palm Oil Barometer. After that, we'll have a panel debate for about 15 minutes with Fiona Wheatley of Bakkavor, Maya Slingerland of Wageningen University, and Georgina Barker of the UK government. So thanks all speakers and panelists for being here. And oh yeah, after that, we'll have a Q&A with the audience. Marcia, can we go to the next slide? So I would like to invite you to do practical concerns in the chat and questions in the Q&A. The questions we'll answer in the last 15 minutes, but you can vote questions up and we'll do the answering in the Q&A or later. And the good news is if you type the questions in the questions box, then we can immediately record them and also answer them later if needed. So thanks for that. First, some introductory remarks from me. I have 3 for you. Marcia, you can have the next slide. So I'm sure many of you will know it, but smallholders produce about 25 to 30% of the global palm oil volume. That's quite significant. And here in the black dots, you see how they are spread across the world. Next slide, please, Marcia. So in Palm Oil Barometer 1, we learned that for smallholders, palm oil is a very profitable crop, but in a volatile market with rising input costs, farmer incomes are quite precarious, and that downstream companies generate most of the profits. Next slide, please, Marcia. So with this barometer we published today, we feel the urgency to share it with you because there are 3 key developments that we see that increase the relevance of smallholder inclusivity. And that is 1, the impact of climate change related extreme weather, floods and droughts. And we see increasingly uncertain income due to increasing volatility of input costs and no direct higher FFB prices. On top of that, we see increasing sustainability requirements, mainly in the EU market. So these things together bring us to the conclusion that we want to think with you about this topic. We don't have all the answers. We want to learn, and we want to see how we can create more inclusive palm oil value chains. With these introductory remarks, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Law Chu Chen from Malaysia. Law, he will talk about the business case of smallholders in Malaysia. He will really deep dive into the topic. So, and we can take the conversation from there. Law, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marike. Welcome everyone to the launching of Barometer 2. I'm Law from Malaysia. Today, I'm going to share with you challenges faced by the smallholders, particularly highlighting 3 points. The first being the fluctuation of oil palm price, and second is fluctuation of input price, and the third is climatic factors and how these poses challenges to the smallholders in Malaysia. Next, please. Okay, so in Malaysia, we have approximately 26% of the oil palm area being managed by smallholders, supporting approximately 450,000 of families. Now, among them, we have approximately 11.8% organized smallholders, or usually called as a scheme plasma smallholders, Now, approximately 15% of them are independent smallholders. Now, in the definition of smallholders in Malaysia is the farmers have land size of less than 40.46 hectare or equivalent to 100 acres. Next, please. Now, Solidaridad has done a social impact assessment. So we found that a very strong majority of the smallholders have reported their improvement of standard living compared to their earlier generation due to involvement in oil palm planting. A strong majority of them is depend on oil palm cultivation as the primary income. Weak majority of them indicated that the income generation is actually sufficient for their financial upkeep. Now, a collective majority of them also reported that under situational duress, they will not be able to sustain their loan payments, particularly during the time where the CPO price is low. Next, please. Now, let's have a look at the data that we collected in 2021 under the Scope 1 program, the income. Now, please do note that the oil palm, the data being captured is during the time where oil palm price is at a peak in 2021. So by average, farmers from Perak, Johor, Sarawak, and Sabah under the Scope 1 program generate about 2,800 ringgit Malaysia per month. Now, Statistic Department of Malaysia new poverty guideline is actually 2,200 ringgit. Now, in comparison to that, there is the price where it is at peak. So in 2024, the oil palm price is actually lower than 2021. Therefore, a lot of farmers in 2024 actually earning below the poverty line. In order to confirm that, we also run a sustainability assessment across all the states. Next, please. So we take example of smallholders in Perak. We have 300 farmers collected in Perak region alone, likewise in Johor and Sarawak. Now, most of the assessment revealed that more than 50% of our farmers is actually operating on a small land, which is about 2 to 2.5 hectare of land. But in this regards, Perak smallholders actually doing quite well. They have high yield compared to other states, which in Johor approximately Perak about 18 ton per hectare per year. Johor is about 14 to 15 ton per hectare per year. Now Sarawak is 9 to 10 ton per hectare per year. All of the smallholder reported that the fluctuation of CPO price and weaker Malaysian ringgit actually negatively impacted their livelihood. Now, the result also suggested the smallholder monthly income, which averaged out at 1,085 ringgit Malaysia, actually is well below the national poverty line. Next, please. Let's have a look at the price of the FFB at the meal get price from 2022 to 2024. If you can see that the price of 2023 and 2024 is actually not great, not as high as 2021 and 2022. Next, please. Now, when we take a deep dive, we understand that in the operational costs, farmers pay the most in the fertilizers. That is the single most expensive input that the farmers have to pay. Now, if you see here, it is about 1,000 ringgit compared to other costs. Now, next, please. So let's have a look at the fertilizer price for the past 20 years, 2002 to 2022. We observed the peak at 2028 and 2029, but it was quickly stabilized. And then now after COVID, we have observed another peak. Now, the data that we obtained here is only until 2022. Therefore, next, please. Next slide. Yeah, we put together the data at the price of fertilizer from 2022 to 2025. If you see here, we observe actually there's not much of declining, reducing, meaning to say that at this moment, the farmers have been suffering for extremely high fertilizer price for more than about 4 years, and it is actually hard to be absorbed by the smallholders. Next, please. Now, we have also done a climate vulnerability assessment. We have projected future climatic information for the next 50 years. Based on that, we found that the highly suitable area for oil palm will not undergo a drastic change in near future. Near future here means less than, within 5 to 10 years. However, there is a high chance for the highly suitable area of oil palm cultivation will diminish in the beginning of mid-century. Some new area of suitable will be occurring in the 21st century later. It also means that these smallholders who unfortunately fall within the region of a place which will become unsuitable for oil palm will require adaptive and flexible management practices, plus a guidance in terms of long-term decision making. This is where we can actually support them. Next, please. So this is actually the few photo that we capture. This happened recently where the farmers unable to go to the field due to the flash flood. The road has simply become a river. Next, please. Next, yeah. So this is a area view. No, sorry, back. Yeah. So this land cover multiple smallholders where this flash flood actually beyond the coping capacity of oil palm smallholders is a landscape issue. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. So back to the chart just now. Smallholders, 90% of them aware of what is climate
Masha,
change.
we need to go one slide
Never
back.
mind, it's okay. So, yeah. So
Thanks.
the 90% of them also reported that it has already started to affect the oil palm yield. And also 90% of them already suffer loss due to prolonged drought and flash flood. Next. So this is an example where the EUDR obligation of operators for palm oil. I think this is also applicable to all the sustainability due diligence requirement, where through the chain of custody mechanism, actually the burden of proof for either non-deforestation or sustainability is usually being delegated to the smallholders. But most of the oil palm smallholders in Malaysia are not well equipped to comply with sustainability standards, and without adequate support, the risk of them becoming increasingly alienated from the domestic and global market will become higher. Now, since the downstream of the supply chain frequently do not know who their smallholder suppliers are, where they are located, or what capacity they have or do not have, it is always difficult to deal with the increasingly demanding sustainability challenges. Likewise, the oil palm smallholders simply do not know where the palm oil is going to end up with from their farm. While some companies are demonstrating that they have taken necessary steps to implement a comprehensive sustainability agenda, these sectors need a substantial improvement in action and investment on smallholders level. Now, please take note that companies can vary very significantly in the transparency and strength of their smallholders farmers inclusion policy and reporting, particularly in the procurement section. Now, concern that we have now is the global palm oil buyers show little willingness to compensate producer for operating sustainably. For example, paying a sustainability cost or investing in a long-term trading relationships. Therefore, before I end my slide, I would like to say that stakeholders, active participants in establishing inclusive supply chain, it's the utmost key in order to maintain the sustainability, in order to bring the industry moving forward. With that, I would like to stop and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lo, for giving this extensive insight into the context of smallholders in Malaysia and allowing us to understand this situation there and also how floods and droughts can affect it and price volatility impacts them. With this short presentation, after this one, I would like to move to Mark Wong of SD Guthrie to give us some insight into how SD Guthrie is dealing with this small inclusivity at this moment. Mark, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And I'd just like to say thanks also to Solidaridad for the invitation to participate in this webinar and the opportunity to share some reflections on how we try and include smallholders in our corporate strategy. If we can go to the next slide, please. For just a quick introduction for those of you who are not familiar with SD Guthrie, we are a vertically integrated plantation company, which means that we've got upstream plantations in Malaysia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. We have just under 600,000 hectares of plantations in those countries. But we also have downstream refining assets spread out across 12 countries. So that's within Southeast Asia, in Papua New Guinea, South Africa, Europe, and also in the UK. As a company, we've also supported by a global research and development organization, and we also have some new verticals in renewable energy and also wind industrial parks. Next slide, please. So including smallholders and supporting smallholders is something that we're very explicit about. And you can see here basically our Beyond Zero sustainability framework, where we have sort of transforming lives and livelihoods parked under our transform pillar of the strategy. And the target for us really is to support 50,000 smallholders in our supply chain. And what I'll get into a little bit more in the following slides in the presentation is a little bit around how we balance out the commitments we have in the other pillars. So, for example, things like no deforestation, low carbon, into the smallholder programs that we have. If we can go to the next slide, please. So globally, we work with about 46,000 smallholders, and what you see on the slide here is kind of the split between the different countries. Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, about 17,000 smallholders, Malaysia, about 3,200, Indonesia and Thailand, etc. And I suppose the first reflection, which I thought would be useful to share in the webinar today, is that when we talk about smallholder inclusion programs, there is no one size fits all. I think in general, there are principles that we're trying to do. So we know it's really about how do we support smallholders in terms of their productivity. We know it's about trying to bring the kind of sustainability commitments and agenda that we have on things like no deforestation, forced labor, low carbon into the smallholder programs. And ultimately, I think it's also about how we then link smallholders to global supply chains. And I'll come back to that last point in a bit. But the thing that we really have to think through, I suppose, is firstly, how do we interact with smallholders? So in some countries, we have a more direct relationship with smallholders, in which case, we have a lot more opportunities to really create and design those on the ground programs. But in other countries, we may be a little bit further removed. So in places like Thailand, for example, or even how we engage with smallholders in Malaysia, we actually don't engage directly with smallholders. And often we have to partner with supply chain partners like fresh fruit bunch traders, or in cases like Thailand, with the independent mills who are sourcing from the smallholders directly around how to design, how to partner with these smallholder programs. The other thing which is also quite interesting around supply chain integration is that it's also about how we might be able to bring our customers into the loop, because we know that smallholder development is something which is a responsibility for the whole supply chain. And in places like Malaysia, we've also been successful at being able to link through some of the brands and global customers like Colgate Palmolive into our smallholder programs. The other thing to think a little bit about with smallholder programs is that it's a long-term commitment. So, at the moment we see lots of organizations racing around saying we want to help smallholders, how do we do this? We want to do awareness programs, etc. But, if you really think about it, in order to put the right support program in place and really affect change, it's a really long-term investment. So one thing I would say is that, no matter where you sit in the supply chain, no matter what you're trying to do, it's important to think about smallholder support programs in terms of that really long-term investment. For smallholders, when they invest in oil palm, it's a 20-25-year investment. That's the length of the plantation lifetime. So, going in, doing kind of a token awareness briefing session, although useful, you've also got to measure the impact of where that is, but more importantly, where does it go from then onwards? And lastly, I think I want to touch a little bit around market dynamics. And that's kind of why I also have on the slide here a little summary around the level of roundtable on sustainable palm oil certification that we have. So market dynamics play a really large role, especially in terms of bringing incentives to smallholders for change. And so, in certain locations where we've been able to be more successful in terms of being able to create that market for sustainable palm oil, we've had a lot more success at being able to work with smallholders around our SPO certification. And you can see there For example, that in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, we have all 17,203 smallholders RSPO certified. And that's because of the link that we've made from that supply chain into Europe and the UK, where we've got good support from customers around RSPO and sustainable sourcing. But we've actually been a little bit less successful at that in some other areas. So, you know,
Mark,
the reason.
Can I do a quick check? Are we still on the right slide? We have
we're still on the right slide.
You're
Sorry, I'm
Good.
just verbalizing a little bit and just using this as a bit of a visual. Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
And I think, you know, really, I think the point I want to stress there a little bit is around market actors. You know, if you really want to try and support programs as smallholders as well, you really need to think about how this fits into your core procurement strategy. And again, thinking a little bit around what I said earlier on about long-term support. You know, for smallholders and their investment in their plantations, it's a generational lifetime investment, 20-25 years. You know, it means that any support on the sustainable sourcing also needs to be thought of as long-term. So that kind of token purchase that you make one year and then not making the other year, you know, it really does have an impact further down the supply chain. If we can go to the next slide, please. And lastly, I think, you know, what I want to finish off a little bit is that we are bringing, with the sustainability agenda we have today, a lot of complexity into the supply chain. And I just have a few summaries there on the slide at the moment. So, you know, there's things like HCV, high conservation value assessments, HCS, high carbon stock assessments for no deforestation. We've got SBTI, low carbon. There's EUDR coming in, traceability, where it's really about being able to map plantations, as you can see on the slide today. So again, we're bringing a lot of that complexity at both a technical level, but also it's a growing level of complexity, because, you know, if you think about all these things that we're asking plantation companies and smallholders to do on the ground, it's a growing list of activities and tools and approaches. And at the end of the day, if we can just click on to the next slide, please. You know, we really need to think about what is it that the smallholders need? Like how do we prioritize, you know, their needs? Because we're asking them to do very technical, very complex things, which brings into the mix, I suppose, a level of technical capacity building. There is a huge amount of administrative work that needs to be done and capacity building done on that side too. And at the end of the day, I think we need to ask ourselves, what's the benefit for them? You know, how are we incentivizing them? How are we helping them to cover the costs and manage the resources required to adopt these things? So Marika, I think I'll just I'll stop there, and thanks very much, and looking forward to the discussion later on.
Thanks so much, Mark. This was a really insightful presentation about your journey to bring smallholder inclusivity. I see questions for you in the chat, or no, in the Q&A. Let me say this right. If you would be able to answer, that would be lovely. And Mark, thanks again. And with that, I would like to move to Michelle Riemersma, my very own colleague based in Europe, who will share the key recommendations that are in the Palm Oil Barometer that is launched today. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marike. So my name is Michelle Riemersma. I work at Solidaridad Europe. And actually, the ending of Mark's presentation is a perfect bridge to the core message of our Solidaridad Palm Oil Barometer. Because what we've done, we've looked into how the value is distributed in the palm oil value chain. And what we found out is that although there's quite some value added throughout the value chain, we see that not all of it, or not sufficient of it, is making its way down to farmers. So while we see that smallholder farmers can make a decent income out of oil palm farming, we also see that if the conditions are not right, that actually farmer prosperity is a house of cards. They depend on so many different factors to make a stable living income that it's no guarantee that in this sector you will make an income. So as Solidaridad, we're thinking, what can we do about this situation? How can we build a more strong foundation underneath this house of cards? And one way that we think that's very important to do this is if the sector would switch from a situation that actually Mark was already describing, from a situation in which downstream players are demanding sustainability requirements from their suppliers. So they're asking for NDPE compliance, to get certified, to assure the quality of the product, to deliver documents, data, policies, which all of it is very good. That has brought the sector a long way from where it was 20 years ago, and that has increased the level of sustainability in the sector a lot. But we also see that it's not working in an optimum way. We see that it has the potential to exclude the most vulnerable actors in the supply chain, namely independent smallholders. And we think that it's now time to shift from sustainable sourcing to a system of inclusive procurement. So what we mean by that is that it takes into account the interests of smallholders, to give them a voice, to give them ownership, to ensure that the risks are shared equally in the value chain, and that the reward for sustainable production is paid to the ones who are actually doing the growing of the oil palm. So this is not just a call to be a charitable call to downstream parties to just pay more, but we really think that it's in their own interest to invest in a resilient supply base, to ensure that they have strong supplier relationships throughout the whole supply chain, not only down to the smallholder growers at the end, but also the parties in between, in the middle of the sector. And this comes, of course, on top of the sustainability requirements that are there in legal obligations and in voluntary commitments that companies have committed to. So how do we want to process with it? Well, on the next slide, you see how Solidaridad has now defined 4 principles of procurement for prosperity. So this are the 4 Ps. The first P is for policy. It's essential that you formulate as a company an internal policy, ensure commitment and implementation. As a second principle, pricing and fair trading terms are very important. So this is not only about pricing, but also about payment terms and reward for sustainable performance. As a third P, we have the principle of partnerships. Companies should introduce equal partnerships and collaboration throughout the supply chain. And through programs, which is the fourth P, companies should support suppliers through programs and adequate investments. In the report, we have formulated recommendations on all these 4 principles, and I will now shortly address some examples in all 4 of the principles. So on the next slide, we see that when it comes to policy, it's really essential to ensure that there is leadership commitment and that the policies are integrated in the whole strategy of the organization. Dealing with smallholders and other growers should not be a matter of a sustainability department that's doing some work on the side, but it should really be integrated in the procurement decisions of an organization. There's no point in doing nice sustainability programs with smallholders if, on the other hand, your procurement division is not willing to pay an extra cent for implementing sustainability requirements that your suppliers are upholded to. So on the next slide, we see a recommendation on pricing. Companies really have to implement fair pricing and payment terms. So it is not limited to the exact price that's being paid for the fresh fruit bunches, but it also is about how fast do you pay? Do you wait 60 days to pay your bills, or do you do this within 30 days? Do you make a long-term contract with your suppliers, or do you just work with renewing contracts every month instead of having a one-year contract? Those kind of negotiations are essential to create long-term stable supplier relationships. And we also see that it's important to reward producers that are actually producing in a sustainable way, for example, by means of carbon insetting. As Mark showed, a lot of downstream companies have SBTi commitments. They have to limit their Scope 3 emissions, and they can do that by incentivizing smallholders to inset carbon in their at farm level, or for example, mills can do that as well. And furthermore, smallholders that are certified according to the RSPO standards, they earn credits. They can sell them to downstream parties. But when downstream parties buy these credits, they should do this at a good price. Don't try to negotiate the best price that's possible for your own multinational company, but take into account what is needed for smallholder farmers to make a living income. On the next slide, we have a recommendation about equal partnerships and collaboration. So This means, for example, giving a voice to smallholders in multi-stakeholder initiatives. Make sure that they are represented in organizations like the RSPO. RSPO is already working on that, but there are other multi-stakeholder initiatives, platforms where companies gather, where they really need to ensure that smallholders are heard and that their interests are taken into account. On the next slide, we have a recommendation for investing in programs. So as Mark already mentioned, these are long-term commitments. It's not just a one-off time, go to a farm and talk to farmers and then everything is fine. As a company, you really need to make sure that you support smallholder farmers for many years, if it's possible. And this can be through programs like assuring access to finance, helping them to get certified, making sure that they're legally registered in the right way, offering seedlings against reduced costs, for example. So if we go to the next slide, to summarize the 4 Ps, so we want to shift from sustainable sourcing to an inclusive procurement system. Therefore, it's important to take into account the 4 aspects of farmer inclusivity. That's a concept that we borrow from researchers Vermeulen and Kotela. It's about ownership, voice, risk, and reward. And you can read more about that in the Palm Oil Barometer. And based on those 4 aspects of farmer inclusivity, we've developed the 4 Ps for procurement for prosperity. So a major part of the Palm Oil Barometer is about the business part, so the companies that are procuring palm oil, but they're not the only actors in this whole ecosystem of palm oil that have an important role to play. There are also governments, NGOs, academics that can make a difference in the sector. And the next discussion will also feature those voices. So Marike, back to you.
Thanks so much, Michel. Thanks for giving insight into the recommendations of the Palm Oil Barometer, and I hope they are inspirational. With that, I would like to move to the panel debate. I'm very happy that I have 3 very wise women here with me in the team. Fiona Wheatley of Bakkavor and Maya Slingerland of Wageningen University and George Barker from FCDO. We'll talk briefly about the role various actors can play. So I'll ask this question to all 3 of them, and then I will move into the Q&A session because I really saw some super nice, interesting questions in the Q&A that I would love to take on. So with this short introduction, Fiona, can you tell us how, looking at these developments as sketched by Law and Mark and Michel, how do you look at this from a further downstream supply chain perspective?
It's very interesting and very enlightening. I think it's important, first of all, to give a very brief summary of what Bakkavor does as a business, because I appreciate not everyone will be familiar with the company. We supply fresh prepared food to UK retailers for their own brand products. We've got over 20 manufacturing sites in the UK, making everything from prepared salads, pizzas, garlic breads, dips and sauces, ready meals, cream cakes, desserts. So all of these all these products, all these things we make, I mean, to do that, we have to buy literally thousands of different materials from hundreds of suppliers, produced by hundreds of thousands of farmers globally. So the nature of our supply chain and our supply relationships very much determines and dictates how we can best contribute. So I am speaking from the perspective of that kind of business. And I think it's important to recognise that businesses who have much shorter supply chains and who buy, you know, a less diverse portfolio of materials can contribute in a much more direct way. So I'm kind of bringing a perspective from kind of the complicated side of supply chains. And we see supporting smallholders generally as part of our broader goal to improve supply resilience. And that absolutely means supporting, I mean, first of all, making sure smallholders aren't disadvantaged, that there, where practical and where mechanisms are available, supporting smallholders, because we think that smallholder production in certain areas really does deliver added social and community benefit. That it would be, we don't want to lose that within, again, the portfolio of global agriculture. We have 3 key strategies to support this general agenda. The primary one very much relates to what we buy and how we buy, and that is around, basically that's sustainability standards. So for palm oil, that's very much RSPO. And that's our primary way to support suppliers generally committing to sustainability improvements, whether that's human rights, smallholder production, environmental protection. But you know, the benefits of RSPO or of standard schemes in general, I think, go beyond just that, because they allow for dialogue. They allow for shared learning and shared communication and articulation of the challenges. I would know nothing about the situation of growers in palm oil regions if it wasn't for my participation in RSPO over the years. So that's incredibly and often forgotten value. It also helps contribute to creating a more level playing field, so those who are making commitments to all these social and environmental agendas are not disadvantaged economically by setting a minimum standard of what we expect in terms of production. So that's our first strategy, is supporting schemes like RSPO. Our second one is around our climate and human rights strategy, where we seek to make sure that smallholders and workers, or small farmers and workers, are included in climate strategies, climate mitigation strategies, but are also not disadvantaged by these strategies, because it's very easy to look at climate change and to make decisions which are good for the climate, but perhaps not quite so good for small farmers. So we participate in global discussions around trying to understand what these negative impacts could be and making sure that they're considered as we develop our own climate strategies. And then finally, purchasing practices. Various people have mentioned the importance of kind of good relationships with suppliers and long-term relationships. And we're very proud that over 80% of our suppliers have been with us for well over 10 years, sometimes 20, 30 years. And the stability of contracts year on year is absolutely important. So yeah, again, I do have to concede that we perhaps don't have a direct relationship with smallholders. We just don't. That's the nature of supply chains. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do. And we like to think that we that strategy, these activities combined, will make a positive difference to the smallholder situation in the short and long term.
Thanks so much, Fiona, and thank you for pointing out that I think both for smallholders there's no one size fits all, but also for downstream actors there's really no one size fits all. So I think it's a matter of looking into specific context and learning. Thanks so much. And I should have mentioned you're really, let's say, one of the experts in the industry for a long time, involved in RSPO also for a long time. So thank you so much for being here and bringing your expertise. With that, I would like to move to Maya to give us a perspective from the science side and the role science can play in this dynamic. And Maya, you've also been a key advisor in the development of this Palm Oil Barometer. So thank you for that. And your name is also mentioned in the report.
Thanks, Marike. Let me also briefly introduce myself. I'm working at Wageningen University in the Plant Production Systems group. And what is important about this group is not just about plants. In fact, it's more about the farming system. So the farmer is central, as the farmer is the producer, but also custodian of the landscape and also actor in the supply chain. So we think a farmer is key for many developments. And I truly believe in a combination of using scientific knowledge, being transparent also about what we don't know, and to investigate these unknowns together. So research can, in this case, investigate from literature and practice the variety of inclusion options across farm types, across supply chains and locations that are all diverse. And findings can then be shared and used to co-design inclusive systems in different locations for those different farmers, preferably addressing all the 4 aspects of inclusion that were just mentioned. And if you allow me, I just want to say a few words about the project in which we do this. In the Sustain Palm project in Indonesia, we are, for example, co-developing intercropping of oil palm to increase income, which is reward, to increase income and climate resilience, which addresses risks, and as an option for sustainable oil palm production that smallholders really want. So they have voice. And smallholders also own this intercrop and the revenues. Inspired by practices seen in the field, we add our agronomic and supply chain knowledge to co-develop a business model that is implemented by local actors. That's very important. They can dismiss us. We are not important. Local actors are important. So it's implemented by local actors, combining investors, input suppliers, off-takers, and agronomic support. And monitoring, and there we have still an important role to play. Monitoring will show whether the model has co-benefits in terms of soil health and biodiversity, and which of the models does not negatively affect the oil palm development and yield. And this latter is of high importance, not only to smallholders, but also to companies and governments in order to embrace an intercropping model. And when labor is an issue, we also develop a benefit sharing model where skillful crop farmers cultivate the crop on oil palm land. And this we also test with large companies to address some of their issues. And it provides income for landless farmers, because we're not just for oil palm farmers, there are more farmers in the world. So to summarize, I propose that research identifies the most promising examples of inclusiveness in oil palm systems. They co-design arrangements and systems to the best of our current knowledge and practices, to implement and monitor them together with partners, to jointly decide on the best performing inclusive supply chains in each specific context. There's no golden bullet or silver bullet. And I think we do not have to wait till we know everything. The challenge is too urgent and too important, so we have to act together now. And this is an invitation to all of you.
Thanks so much, Maya. That's really clear points on what we need to do, how we can put farmers central and study their business cases with various interventions. I think that's really key. And I love the Sustain Palm project that you're managing. So I'm sure we'll learn more about that also at the Sustainable Palm Oil Dialogue that's coming on in Paris. Huh?
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing and lifting a tip of the veil there. And about the role that science can bring. I really love that. Yeah, with that, George, can you share a little bit about the role you feel that governments can play? It's a very broad question, and I've asked George to speak about this for 1 to 1.5 minutes, so that's extremely challenging. But thank you again for making the time and for being here. The floor is yours, George.
No worries. Thanks, Marika. And thanks to all the presenters so far for such a kind of rich set of presentations and information that's been shared. So I'm the smallholder advisor in the UK's International Forest Unit, so kind of focus on some of the livelihood issues in these big supply chains, where you see forest and agriculture kind of coming right together. I think for me, one of the key roles for governments in this really, really important agenda play more of a supporting role for companies and farmers, and in doing that by helping to create the right enabling environment for smallholder inclusion. And also to help the private sector make decisions by providing and setting some of those big market signals. But I think like any other actor that we've seen here today, governments will only ever have a limited impact if we're working alone. And so, picking up on the partnerships point from the Barometer report, I think one of the core roles of government comes from collaboration and from taking on and leading a bit more of a convening role. That can include working in government to government and kind of working to establish some of that consumer producer collaboration. But it can also be through South-South learning and exchange between producer countries, and sharing what works in terms of reaching and supporting smallholders. And then an additional part of that kind of government to government work, I think, also comes quite strongly through working together as consumer countries and donor companies, so that we can align support mechanisms for smallholders in a way that isn't duplicative and is a way that is efficient and can take things to scale. And I think, as we've seen with kind of the very diverse set of stakeholders on the panel here today, we also need collaboration with the private sector. So, for example, public-private partnerships can be really effective in creating the right incentives to accelerate action at a larger scale, or taking it to a sector-wide scale. So yes, that is my very quick 1.5 minute summary of the role of governments.
Wow, thank you so much, George, for bringing that perspective and also bringing the role of producer governments in. Thank you for being here and with us, and also thank you for supporting the Nice Cops program. That is a big program developed by Solidaridad and IDH to support smallholders on the ground. With this panel introductions, I would like to move to the Q&A session, because I really see some interesting questions coming in the chat. The first question I want to bring to the table is the one by Sasha Tischer. He says, when we see climate change dynamics affecting oil palm landscapes increasingly, it seems we need a paradigm shift of bigger scale. So more and more scientific experts call for speedy renovation and transformation of bigger landscapes to become real biodiverse or real diverse agroforestry landscapes. What do the experts in this online seminar think? And I see that my colleague, Dr. Law, he would like to answer this question. So please, Law, do you want to comment on this? And there's an additional question on this topic. What role do regenerative agriculture practices play for smallholders, particularly to reduce fertilizer cost? By Uli, maybe we can take this question at the same time, Law.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marike. Yeah, I just want to share a little bit experience regarding the multi-commodities or agroforestry. So in Malaysia, there is a numbers of tests has been done since I think 1990s. SD Guthrie, or previously formerly known as Sime Darby, has also been one of the active company who actually tried it. So among them, they tried planting Jatropha, which is a crop that they can plant it under the power grid line, and then livestock, in some cases pineapple and mushroom. So the issue is like what Prof. Maya mentioned just now. There's no one size fits all approach, where the Malaysia government actually done some of the measurement, and they find the how to say the benefits actually is on par with the negative impact that it was being introduced. For example, Jatropha require very intensive labor, and then livestock actually chewing off the core of the young palm, and etc. So it leaves us with a little choice. And other than that, when we want to do intercropping, there's always physically challenged. For example, like in Malaysia, we put the palm, we optimize the planting distance of the palm in such a way that no sunlight is being wasted. But it also means that there is simply not enough sunlight to reach the below canopy for other crop to grow. Now, that is one issue. Cost is one issue, because the farmers now, instead of buying one type of fertilizer in bulk quantity, now they have to buy two separate different type of fertilizer for two crops. That is expensive. And labor issue, Malaysia have a very serious labor issue that we do not have enough labor. When oil palm is being one of the easiest to manage crop as compared to other oil crop. Yeah, so these are a few key challenges that we face. That is why in Malaysia, I don't see intercropping or agroforestry was being pushed at a very big scale, because up to a certain range, it can be done from a pilot perspective or in an experiment design. But when you want to scale up and put it in, let's say 10,000 hectare, 20,000 hectare, it simply is not practical. Now, on the other hand, I want to chip in my thought regarding to transform some of the oil palm into agroforestry. Now, from my perspective, I actually see that there are a few key consideration from our perspective. Now, the first is being the livelihood of the oil palm producer, farmers. Of course, making it agroforestry, there is a risk that the income might drop or might increase, okay? But on the second thing is actually the labor, as I mentioned just now, we do not have enough labor to maintain. And the third is actually the food security. In a lot of Southeast Asian country, oil palm is being regarded as the best cooking oil because they can withstand high temperature oil. It can withstand high temperature and it's actually affordable. So these are a few key issues that, you know, in order for us to recommend a transformation from pure oil palm. So there is two pathways now. Either we push the oil palm production in such a way that from the same piece of land, we are achieving extremely high efficiency oil production from minimum land, or we actually encourage intercropping or agroforestry. Both have its own merit, but we just that in Malaysia perspective, due to the food security issue, the people require affordable, good quality oil, and even both Malaysia and Indonesia is going for the biodiesel, not in the Europe, but in other countries. So these are a few key factors that affecting the industry to judge where they are moving. So that is a few of my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lo. I think it's helpful. I think many people are thinking about regenerative palm oil practices. I see Maya, you want to respond? Can you or Ed, can you maybe be a bit brief?
Yeah,
I see so many nice questions.
I can be very brief. I share completely the idea about agroforestry because then you need to change spacing. What we propose is intercropping at the immature stage, and if you see how many plantations have to do replanting, that is a moment of 3 years that we can do intercropping. And we also develop a land sharing perspective in which you invite smallholders with knowledge and labor that have no land to come to your land and to do the intercropping. And we have several hectares already in big plantations where this works with a business model with benefit sharing. So I think we have to be creative to look where are the options.
Thanks, Maya. I think that's really helpful. I've also seen presentations of my Indonesian colleagues that are really looking into regenerative agriculture and more biodiversity implantations, fertilizer production. So yeah, I think you're right. We need to be creative, study what's happening, learn from it. I see a question from Olad for Fiona. How does Bacafor ensure suppliers comply with the company chain of custody? I think, for example,
Code of conduct. Code of conduct.
Code of conduct. Oh yeah.
I presume.
Done via, you want to answer this one? If done via responsible purchasing practices, how can contractual clauses be used to enforce sustainable behavior on suppliers?
I mean, we do have a supplier code of conduct, and it forms part of all contractual relationships. It's embedded within all Bacafor supplier contracts. However, obviously, that's very different from managing compliance, and we've got a number of programs where for example, recently we had a program where we had a third-party expert doing an assessment of each company's management system to deliver particularly the human rights elements of our code of conduct. And they were all given tailored responses and advice. So basically it was suppliers that represented about 40% of our value. So it's a really substantial portfolio of suppliers. So that's one way. We also send out a self-assessment questionnaire every year that suppliers have to complete and submit, and that gives us an indication of where there may be trends in terms of understanding of the code of conduct or compliance with it. So we've got a number of different mechanisms, but the code of conduct very much forms the foundations of our expectation. It's probably, the challenge we have with the code of conduct is very much around our first tier suppliers. And they are very much, either big manufacturing companies largely, or produce and manufactured goods agents. But a lot of the impact is much further downstream. So actually, we are constantly looking at how the code of conduct is critically important for delivering these foundations around management system. What we have to be doing is looking at this whole supply chain, and particularly the agricultural level of the supply chain, which we're very distant from, and making sure that there's understanding of the impact there and strategies and policies in place to minimize that impact.
Thanks so much, Fiona. I'm looking at the time and it's slipping through our fingers. I have about 10 open questions and 3 minutes left. So I'm going to pick one final topic that I've been seeing coming by, and that is the topic of smallholder support and credit buying in particular. Sasha Tischer raised that in the RSPO, smallholder representative organizations have now raised a proposal to do a moratorium on further smallholder certification, because not enough smallholder credits are bought. And he asked for our perspectives on this. And I think it's a very valuable point to bring up, and it's a challenging one, because on the one hand, you want to see many smallholders certified, so they can access this premium market. But if there's no business case in this certification for them, it's also maybe not a smart thing to advise more of them to be certified, because then they lose out on that. So this question is being addressed in RSPO. RSPO has set up a task force called the Grower Incentive Task Force to look into this issue. And I think it's an issue to be studied. And in this context of the webinar, I think we've pointed out it's a challenging dynamic. The EUDR has probably an impact on the situation where credits can no longer be used to cover the volume. And I think it is important for European buyers to continue to support smallholders by buying credits and making long-term commitments on that. So I think this is what I would want to say on this topic. And looking at the time, I think we should leave it at this. Fiona, I see you frown deeply. I don't know what that means. Oh, now you unfrown. Good. So at this stage, I would like to say thank you all for your attention. I think my learnings are there's no one size fits all, not for smallholders and not for businesses. And we need to study and develop examples that work to support smallholders and include them. At this stage, I want to thank all the participants for their good questions. We'll answer questions somehow. I hope we can do that. We'll record them. And here's a link to the barometer that we'll publish today. And thanks to all the panelists for their very brief and focused contribution. And with that, I would like to close this webinar and thank you all for your attention. And I look forward to working with all of you on this. Thanks for now. Bye-bye.